This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. NBA action hot and heavy, and a lot of good stuff going on. And you know how we do, man. My man Warren Shaw and I, we back on the regular, like JaVale McGee on Shaqtin' the Fool Countdown. We doing it lovely, ready to discuss all the hot button topics of the NBA. So let me roll it out. The red carpet with my man 50 Grand, my brother from another mother, repping for www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna and PNC. My man Warren Shaw. What's going on, brother?
I'm chilling, man. Hope you're doing well, and salute to all the fans listeners to the NBA Baseline. It's holiday season, getting ready for Christmas and all that. Gonna have some Christmas games to discuss in a few weeks as well, too, but a lot of other action to get into this week, my man.
I know, like in our last show, we were talking about how, teams might be wanting to do a little holiday shopping. And listen, we got some really positive feedback from that show. I think, when you're talking about building an effective NBA team, an NBA team where a foundation is laid, or basically the missing piece, to actually take that team to the next level. There's a couple of guys on there, man. I think given the right situation, the right circumstance, maybe the right coaching system, I think that those guys can actually help put one or two teams who might be sitting around mediocrity or stuck on neutral, might kind of get them over the edge or push that team into overdrive, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Opportunity seems to be everything in the NBA for a lot of these players, too. But I heard something on another show recently. I want to say it was on the Woj podcast, and I think they were talking about Mike D'Antoni. And he said when you put limits on players, they reach them. You know what I mean? So that's why he trusts his players to go out there and, shoot a bunch of threes and all those other things, too. But when coaches in general, if they give an opportunity for some of these players, they're going to go out there and produce. Unless you're Rudy Gay and you really just hate the city of Sacramento. So I guess in that situation, that's not going to work no matter how much opportunity you get. I mean, Gay's still playing effectively, but in general, I think a lot of these guys are just looking for some different opportunities, like a Greg Monroe trying to get out of Milwaukee. So, that's kind of what I got out of it too, man. I hope all the fans and listeners enjoy the show.
Yeah, can you imagine Greg Monroe playing in Houston, just chucking up threes? I mean, it's not like Marc Gasol ain't doing it. You know what I'm saying? Doing his little O'Connor shimmy. You know what I'm saying? Hitting game-winning three-point shots against, one of the best teams in the NBA. So but I love it, man, because it's bringing back the swagger, and it's just not limited to your athletic 2-guard, 3-guard, point forward, and the point guard play. Even the bigs want to step out and get a little shine on their game, and I'm loving it, man. I think it's taking the NBA to another level as far as viewership goes, because people love their big. So we got a great show on tap to discuss and great topics ready to roll out for you guys. So once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. In a little bit, in our segment of The Drop, we are going to do a Who You Got redo. That's right. A while back, we had a conversation about who would you take? Who would you start your franchise with? Jimmy Butler or Kawhi Leonard? And I'm telling you, man, we were getting so many great responses and great reaction and feedback from that conversation. Well, listen, man, a year or two later, look at what these guys are doing. They're balling. We're going to break it down. Would you revisit that choice that you made the first time around? And then also we are got a spotlight, our baseline spotlight, discussing the game of Wilson Chandler. While the Denver Nuggets are struggling, this guy's game has finally come back to play. And I think the people out in Denver are loving it. And maybe us NBA pundits are feeling it as well, too. And in our segment of The Breakdown, we're going to be discussing those new faces playing in those new places. Are they fitting in well, other than your prototypical greats like Kevin Durant and Dwayne Wade? So we got great topics to put on tap for you guys. We want you to download and discuss, get locked in, get your headphones ready, because we're going to be rolling it out, and we're going to be giving it to you straight here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to check us out on all the available platforms: Microsoft TuneIn, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, and also on iTunes, available on Google Music, also available on the Roku channel. So be sure to download any one of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things NBA. Big shout outs to our guys Freeman and Fox, aka the Sports Brothers, Monday through Friday, our simulcasting our show. Be sure to check them out on Twitter at the Sports Brothers. You know how we do, and you know how we like to set it off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
To the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And main topic for us this week is regarding those newly acquired players from this offseason and the places that they are now playing for, the teams that they're now playing for. Are they fitting in well? Now, everybody is fixated on the outrageous play of guys like Kevin Durant, the Durantula in Golden State, part of that quote-unquote super team. Dwayne Wade, minus all of the animosity that he has for his former team, what he's been able to bring to the table is no short of than what we always expected when Dwayne Wade has kind of been put up against the wall and faces the adversity and also the criticism of whether or not he is past his prime and he's no longer Crash Wade. You know, that to me, we all see that those guys they're doing their thing. But there's some other players that are out there that we did give an opportunity to talk about that we felt that during this offseason, whoever it is that they sign with, whichever team gets these guys, they could be key pieces. And they could also be pieces that could cause an implosion with the structure of how this team is going to proceed moving forward, championship caliber or bust. And so, Shaw, we got a few names out there. We talked about them sparingly during parts of the season so far, kind of sprinkled them in a little bit. But now let's really dig into, after a quarter of the season as a sample size, we look at what these guys are doing. The Serge Ibakas, Al Horfords, Rajon Rondos and such. You know, these guys now playing in new places, new faces. What is your take now when we think about a guy like Serge Ibaka was part of the beginning of the part of that big trade that happened out in OKC, Victor Oladipo to the Thunder, Serge Ibaka back there to the Orlando Magic. What do you take of his transition and what he's so far been able to bring to the Magic?
I think it's a little bit touch and go. It hasn't been the smooth transition that I'm sure Frank Vogel and the Orlando Magic would have hoped from a statistical standpoint and even some rim protection, some of the things he's been able to do. He's had some really, really poor games in terms offensively and even rebounding the basketball. He had an amazing preseason where I thought he was going to come out and be a monster. This is his contract year and the whole nine. And I expect him to really come out of the gate like a game buster, you know, maybe 18-8 type of thing with 1.8 blocks, something to that effect. But we haven't seen that Serge Ibaka this year, and we've seen that in spurts. He played his best game of the year, you know, obviously in the revenge game and in the game-winning shot against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But outside of that, he's been, you know, pretty average. You know, he's starting to pick things up now. I think he's had double-digit scoring in maybe 6 of his 6 or 7 straight games, which is, you know, something that I thought would have been a given coming into the season. But I still think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, and I'm looking for a little more out of Ibaka for the rest of the season.
14 points per game, 6 rebounds, around 1.7 block shots per game. I mean, to me, these are prototypical Serge Ibaka numbers, and they're not numbers that's going to tilt the scale either way you look at it as far as changing the dynamic of this Orlando Magic team. But Shaw, we said this coming in, and I think this was one of the big reasons why I wasn't a proponent for this trade, because I didn't see how this was going to benefit the Orlando Magic. This is a Magic team that I think, minus Victor Oladipo, still has a very young and viable basketball team, and someone who's veteran laden as a Serge Ibaka. And listen, we don't always talk about the mental psyche of what these type of trades and deals does to veteran players. But to me, it's clearly evident that Serge has been shook by this trade. I don't think it's so much the fact that he didn't see the writing on the wall, given the fact that this is a business in the NBA, but I think he's just shook at the fact that he's had 2 bites at a championship apple and has failed to get one of them. And more importantly to that, he was never really considered that true 3 guy like Chris Bosh was during the Miami Heat heyday when it was LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. When we were talking about the big 3 in Oklahoma City, we were talking about Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and it was supposed to be Serge Ibaka, and he's never lived up to the potential of what those guys did back in 2012. So now when I look at what he's doing for the Orlando Magic, I feel like he is still mentally shook by the fact that he has taken a step back, and I don't think he's ever been that dude that he's ready to be the veteran presence to get these guys over the hump to win the basketball game games that the Orlando Magic have lost last season. And I think it speaks volumes to how this might even set back guys like an Aaron Gordon, who are supposed to get those quality minutes and really step up after having an excellent second half of the season. I just think it's a mixed bag to your point, but I think it's a detriment when you look at where the Orlando Magic sit and what Serge Ibaka really should be giving to maybe another basketball team than the Magic itself.
Well, it's funny you mentioned it in the way you do, because I think what ended up happening here is they talked about it in the offseason that they wanted to get a veteran guy on this team and in this roster in the locker room. And Ibaka became available to them, and they had to give Oladipo to do so. But exactly what you're saying, that he isn't necessarily providing for this team, or not maybe in the manner they want, is exactly what they wanted. They wanted him to be that veteran guy to kind of get them over the hump and show them about what it takes to get into the playoffs, as OKC has been in the playoffs for X amount of years in a row, et cetera, playing with KD and Russ. Ibaka knows what it takes to be, especially playing in the ultra competitive Western Conference. That just has not translated to the W's for the Orlando Magic. And again, they have a new coach. They have a more than just Ibaka as a new piece. They're trying to rotate Biyombo into that mix. They've now put Vucevic on the bench, and Evan Fournier is a lead guy now that Oladipo is out. Peyton has gone to the bench. TJ Augustin started. So they have a lot of issues going on. But Ibaka was brought there to be the veteran player that you're talking about right now. And that's why I just think it's ironic and sad to some degree that it hasn't worked out in the first 20 games of the season thus far.
Definitely. Okay, so now that we looked at a guy like Serge Ibaka, right, has not so much that quality piece, or is panning out to be that quality piece the Orlando Magic has hoped for so far in the first quarter of the season. How about a guy like Al Horford? I mean, this was another big name signing, right? The Boston Celtics needed to solidify their front court. They needed a presence in the front court. And I don't know if it's so much the fact that the Celtics bought into getting Al Horford more so as to be a presence as he is to be an efficient offensive chess piece to really help facilitate that ball, where it doesn't always have to be in the hands of Isaiah Thomas, or it doesn't always have to be in the hands of Avery Bradley. And listen, his body of work is very impressive. When you think about Al Horford and what he's been able to give the Atlanta Hawks, he's that foundation piece to the success of the Atlanta Hawks being a viable basketball team, a winning franchise over the last 5 seasons and then some. So 14.9 points per game, 4.6 assists, 52% from the field. He's hitting everything within his range of what he does from career numbers perspective. But he's only played in 10 games so far this season, Shaw. And just to me, I feel in my head like, wow, if he was actually able to play the full 20 games so far that's been played as we're recording this show for the Boston Celtics, what would the Celtics record truly be than only being a few games above 500 this point?
I mean, yeah, it's a question that I'm sure that they're wondering as well. A lot of that, they pointed to injury, as a lot of teams often do when they struggle out the gate. But Horford was brought in to be a key piece and major contributor to what the Celtics are going to do in the future. But I think we both said it, that I didn't know how many more wins that it would actually he would take Boston to in the regular season. He is clearly a person that was brought in to give them some playoff presence and hopefully get them out of the first round of this year and maybe even beyond that. So far, so good in terms of his statistical numbers. Again, reaching some of his similar averages, maybe assisting more than he's ever had in his career at 4.6. Thus far, shooting a nice percentage, 52%, shooting the 3 ball, making 1 3 a game, 41%. Those are great, solid numbers, and he's been an analytical darling when it comes to that. But his numbers are never gaudy. It's just he does a little bit of everything, and it really helps the team and doesn't hurt you in any way, shape, or form. So I think the jury's not out, but it's been pretty much positive for Al Horford in the 10 games that he's played.
No, listen, if you're telling me that they brought him in to be a veteran presence, to have a playoff presence, that is $26 million worth of presence, and your top scorer, your number one player, right, to everybody across the board, and even in the NBA, because he was an all-star last year and is more likely going to be an all-star again this year. Isaiah Thomas is only $6.5 million on the docket. Yeah, if I'm Isaiah Thomas, my motivation is to get to the playoffs because I want to start getting paid like Al Horford is getting paid. Right. So you know what I'm saying? So I guarantee you right then and there, Shaw, I feel listen, Amir Johnson is making more money than Isaiah Thomas is right now. So I see where the motivation is going to be for the quality players. I guess my concern is going to be the fact that he has only participated in half of the game so far in a quarter of this season. And this type of trend, I think, is going to be crucial because, again, they've trimmed down a little bit of what their front court play kind of looks like. And I just feel like as far as skill set go, he is far and ahead, way better than any of the other front court players that they do have on that roster. And it's going to be a shame that when they start playing against that quality competition, as they start nearing towards the better stretch of their games, where they're going to be playing against above 500 teams, Al Horford's presence is going to be tantamount. Now, shooting 41% from three is great, but he's never been known to be an excellent or great defender. And I just feel like one of the problems that I'm seeing with the Celtics team is, as great as they are offensively this year, they are not as good defensively this year. And something is going to have to give when they don't have all of their necessary starters on the basketball court at the same time playing during these stretch of games.
Well, I mean, I think that's an interesting point. I think Horford is a solid defender. He's not a great defender, but, he's always averages one or so blocks a game. This year in 10 games, again, it's a little bit skewed, but 2.7 blocks, never really been a big steals guy. But does this thing defensively. The Celtics have struggled with rebounding. The Celtics have really struggled with rim protection in general. So him giving them almost 3 blocks a game in the 10 games he's played is huge. And I think he's really trying on that side of the basketball for this team, because that's what they need him to do. And he's always been just, hey, point me in the direction and I'll figure it out. Never averaged 20 a game. He's only averaged 10 rebounds a game once in his career as well, too. He just kind of hovers in that 15 and 7, 8 range, and that's just kind of who he is. But again, he never hurts you and is always very, very efficient. I think that's why Boston brought him there. And again, you're right. His payoff is really going to come in the playoff time, assuming he can stay healthy and be out there when Boston makes the playoff in April.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of the breakdown, and we're talking about new faces in new places. Are they panning out for those teams that spent big money in this offseason free agency? So let's go ahead and double up, Shaw. We're talking about, obviously, Serge and Al and that front court combination. Well, let's talk about the New York Knicks, right? They made some serious moves even before the big trade that took place with Victor Oladipo going to OKC and Serge Ibaka going to Orlando. I mean, really, it set the foundation for what I think was going to be what was considered a very big free agency / off season, with the New York Knicks trading to get Derrick Rose, also getting Joakim Noah in free agency. These guys as a dynamic duo really kind of put over the Chicago fan base over the top on the aspirations of possibly thinking that they can get a championship outside of the Jordan era, and it never came to fruition. We know that with Derrick Rose, he's been, always impacted by injuries. Joakim Noah over the last few seasons impacted by injuries. For what the New York Knicks are doing right now, is the acquisition of Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah panning out for the New York Knicks?
And as a whole, you'd have to say yes. I mean, they're above 500 as we record this show. But it's not just them. I think it's the addition of Hornacek coming in there. Some of their bench has played a little bit better than we would have expected. Brandon Jennings has been huge for them. I won't say huge, but he's been, been better than maybe we would have expected. Getting especially 5 assists off the bench coming in on a regular basis. And Rose has pretty much played in every game. So I think it's a collective whole of all those things that have made the acquisitions fine. But taking them individually, Rose has been fine. I think, almost 17 a game, still over dribbles quite a bit, but almost 5 assists, 4.2 rebounds. I think he's been out there, could be a little bit more efficient, but it's okay. But Noah, I'm surprised at how fast the game really has passed him by. I mean, I know it just seems like a couple seasons ago.
we could be playing that Far Side, that Far Side clip now for him, boy. I'm telling you.
Cue it, man, because real talk.
He keeps on passing me by. You know what I'm saying? For real.
I feel you, man. And it's a shame because, a few years ago, again, he's second in MVP voting and all of that, and has really struggled with injury since then. He struggled with injury a little bit as well this season, but just hasn't really been able to put a good string of games together, being healthy and getting all the way back for this New York Knicks team. For a while, he was leading them in assists. I think the first maybe 10 games of the season, he was able to accomplish that, but he's since tailed off and has even fallen out of the rotation some, and I think a lot of that is due to injury. So Noah, hopefully he can bounce back to some degree, but I think they're happy with Rose, and there's already been some talk about maybe extending Rose after the season. Listen, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but that's how good Rose has looked thus far this year.
Well, listen, Derrick Rose is averaging 16.8 points per game, 4.8 assists. And he's only averaging 2.6 turnovers per game. That's the lowest since his rookie year. Okay. So to me, when I think about where Derrick Rose is and really what the New York Knicks has been I mean, my goodness, they have been longing for a quality, recognizable point guard to help kind of lead this basketball team. Derrick Rose is exactly where he needs to be. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb and say Derrick Rose needs to take whatever he's doing here in New York so he can go out and explore his options that are out there. If I'm Derrick Rose, I soak in this whole NBA season playing as a New York Knick, because a lot of things I think are going to be answered by the end of this season. And this is the great litmus test to do it. We haven't been able to do this with Derrick Rose over the last couple of years because of the fact that he's just been injured. So we can't trust in the fact that he's averaging 32 minutes per game, which is the most in like 4 or 5 years, right? And so now when you look at the fact that he's kind of averaging as far as points wise to what he's already doing in his career, now I think the question becomes, can he take that game to the next level? And we've been talking about how this has all been mental more so for Derrick Rose than it has been about the question of health and everything like that. I think that if he finally sees a level of comfort and he sees that this basketball team is winning games, that there is going to come a point that maybe that light kind of flicks for Derrick Rose. Because listen, this Knicks team is not going to survive off of mediocre play by Carmelo Anthony, which is what he's given Knicks so far this season. And Kristaps Porzingis is playing well above his head. Okay, so at some point, they're going to have to rely on Derrick Rose to step his game up. But if you're Derrick Rose, you have to feel really, really good about what you've been doing so far for this Knicks basketball team. Because like to your point, they're an above 500 basketball team. They're right in the throes of the playoff contention. And really, their best basketball, I think, has yet to kind of come to fruition under the helm of Jeff Hornacek. Now, for Joakim Noah, I completely agree with you 110%. I don't know what has happened to Joakim Noah, but you're only averaging 22 minutes per game. That to me says, one, you're obviously still not completely healthy, or your head coach has no confidence or whatever it is that you're giving forth to this basketball team, enough more so that guys like Kyle O'Quinn is absorbing minutes from you. Okay, guys that I can't even make names out of that played international ball before they've come here are now contributing more for you. Hernan Gomez, I mean, guys like that. Like, it's telling me something about Joakim Noah that's not translating to whether or not the money that they have invested in what he's supposed to help give them. And this is not about points and statistics. It's just about his overall game. To me, I think it's just completely fallen off. His defensive rating is like a 106, which is like the worst in his career. And that's just not even playing with the regulated number of minutes that we've been used to seeing Joakim Noah play for other basketball teams. So to me, he definitely is not the fruitfulness of this side of the bargain that the Knicks have banked on. But I will say this much. If he is an inspiration to Derrick Rose coming out and giving the Knicks what they need at point guard, then they are definitely take it and run with it, even though it's the most expensive psychiatric help that Derrick Rose has needed since he's been playing as a Chicago Bull.
No, and again, I think all of what you said is amazingly on point and accurate. You know, I'm rooting for Noah. I think he's just one of those guys when he was on your team, same thing. You want him to do well, and you're really for him, and he really is a team and locker room type guy. To see him struggle like this is really frustrating. And again, it's only a quarter of the season, has passed, so he has plenty of time to turn things around so he can get healthy. But I definitely want to see him play better than he has been. And something we'll get into maybe at the end of this segment too is just is there any type of buyer's remorse for any of these guys too? So we'll save that towards the end, and we'll move on to the next player.
All right, Rajon Rondo, Shaw. Listen, we talked a lot about what Dwayne Wade has been doing for the Chicago Bulls, and the fact that he has come out and emphatically said this is Jimmy Butler's team. And look, Jimmy Butler is balling right now. He's made it known that this is his team. I mean, he's on commercials right now for quasi Space Jam 2 commercials for Nike. So clearly, Jimmy Butler is like, I'm running things in the shy. But let it not be said that the guy that's really running this ship, that's making it so much easier for Jimmy Butler to be the face of this franchise and really to kind of sweep underneath the rug any fallacies that take place with Dwayne Wade and what he really should be bringing to his basketball team has been the gameplay of Rajon Rondo. I have to say, I'm reasonably surprised about what Rajon Rondo has been able to do, given the fact that he is playing on a basketball team with guys' egos that are bigger than his, maybe to some level and degree. But he has got the pedigree. He's got the chip. You know what I'm saying? He can rock that ring. So there's nothing that Jimmy Butler, nothing that Taj Gibson, nothing that Doug McBuckets or anybody else on that Bulls franchise can say that he doesn't already have at the table. I think it's a welcome surprise that Rajon Rondo is playing this well for the Bulls, even though this is still a basketball team who's not expected to seed high or even make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, Rondo has taken on a leadership role more than anything else, and trying to guide some of the younger guys alongside Wade, and really be the voice in the locker room, as well as be a guy who can distribute and get everybody the basketball. He came out and had some really nice things to say about Robin Lopez and what he could mean for the team as well too. And he tries to make sure he looks for his bigs. Rondo's numbers overall are pretty solid. I think 8.2 points, 7.2 assists, 6.7 rebounds. Again, triple double-ish, numbers in the range, if you will. But shooting his worst percentage ever at 39%, but he's also not trying to take a whole lot of shots. So I think in that mold, he understands what his role is on this basketball team. And I think he's played a little bit better statistically as of late. But again, he's the same mode as, maybe Al Horford and to some degree, where Wade and Rondo are really trying to get this Bulls team into the playoffs, and then really to see if they can let their leadership shine and bring that team forward when it comes down to things moving forward and when we get to March and April. But overall, I'm satisfied with Rondo, and I think the Bulls should be as well too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think Rajon Rondo is doing an adequate job, and listen, he is becoming a viable option. He's getting better at shooting the basketball a little bit. I think, as time weighs on, we'll see if whether or not that still happens. He's still a horrendous free throw shooter. But nonetheless, unless teams, are stuck on stooping and figuring out who their Achilles heels is going to be as far as getting or leaving open for the shot, it's clearly going to be Rondo. But I do think at some particular point, it's going to click. And maybe this basketball team is a lot better than what we advertise. All right, Shaw, out in San Antonio, Pau Gasol. This is kind of those signings that kind of flew under the radar, so to speak, because I think everybody knew that if Pau Gasol goes to the San Antonio Spurs, he was going to be a good player. He's going to be a decent player. But would it translate to the San Antonio Spurs being the kind of basketball team that they are right now, which is considered as a top 4 team overall in the NBA? And I got to say, hey man, he's living up to the brand. He's living up to what's being advertised, giving them exactly what they need. Now, whether or not it translates to giving them what they need to get over the hump during their shortcomings in playoff play is something that is left to be seen. But I can definitely say that what he's been giving this San Antonio Spurs team from a front court perspective has been more than admirable, given the circumstances and playing under the shadow of the legend that is the big fundamentals.
Yeah, I think statistically he's having a better year than Duncan did last year in his final season. But defensive wise, we all know Gasol, that's not his calling card. Yeah, he gets, 1+ blocks a game and all of those things. But, it's kind of a hollow stat for him specifically. His minutes are down, roughly 5 minutes a game from a season ago. And we knew that would be the case going to San Antonio in a system where they like to, have the player maintenance plan for the entire year and, doesn't play all back-to-backs and things of that nature. And LaMarcus Aldridge, who is 5-6 years younger than Pau, is already, missing games as a result of it too. The only person who seems to get a consistent allotment of minutes is Kawhi, and that's well-deservedly so. I'm in the mix. I'm in the middle, I guess, if you will, with Gasol and what he's looked like, because he said he's looked lost out there at times. His numbers of 11.2 and 7.3 rebounds, those are solid for what San Antonio is going to ask of him. But it's another one of those situations where they're saving him and hoping again the playoffs is where he's really going to make his shine and make them a lot better than they are in the regular season. But I still thought he wouldn't struggle this much statistically, but again, I don't want to hold that against him because again, it's the San Antonio system, and as we move into our other segment later on, Kawhi Leonard was averaging 15, 14 a game a couple seasons ago because Pop didn't want to deploy him. So I think that's a little bit what's going on with Pau right now. He's just trying to find his bearings in the regular season.
Yeah, well, to your point though, Shaw, we're talking about, is the money that was being used translate to what the expectations are for the player when he's out there performing on the basketball court? And really, to your point, I got to tell you, I felt it was very interesting that the Spurs did put out the kind of money that they did to get Pau Gasol, because Pau Gasol, to me, I felt was a contradiction to the style of play that the San Antonio Spurs would want to have as a player in that type of offense. I'm not saying that Pau Gasol statistically would not help this basketball team, but because of the fact that he is not a great defender, whether it be from an individual or rotational perspective. I felt like he would be the kind of person that's pretty much is going to cause Greg Popovich to pull whatever little gray hair he still got out in his head. You know what I'm saying? But listen, you live for what you live with what you get and what you pay for. Maybe that's the reason why he's, getting all snarky with the media when in games in which they win by 5 and he says it's the most atrocious basketball play that he's ever seen in his life. I mean, I don't know if that's a means of motivation or just saying, listen, I paid a lot of money for Pau Gasol. Can you at least sidestep a little bit better than what you're normally doing for me right now? But all in all, I think that the San Antonio Spurs are getting exactly what they need. Somebody, to your point, like a Al Horford, gives them a little bit of everything in moments during the regular season where we see these kind of lulls and expose these kind of fallacies about why the San Antonio Spurs shouldn't be considered as the outright favorites or wouldn't be considered as the outright formidable contenders to maybe the Golden State Warriors or the Los Angeles Clippers or against athletic basketball teams. I think he's giving them exactly what they need. And to your point again, Shaw, I think it's definite that you can see Popovich figuring out a way to make sure that he utilizes him throughout the regular season so he maintains what he gives them, but then hopefully he has enough in the tank to step it up another level and assist guys like LaMarcus Aldridge and Kawhi Leonard as they try to make this run one more time. Finally, Shaw, the last guy that we want to bring up with the new faces and new places, Dwight Howard. I've talked about him a little bit. I don't know who this Dwight Howard is. All I know is my man seems to be like reliving the ludicrous life, just throwing bows and getting all, brodied up against dudes in the front court. Now, the Atlanta Hawks have a physical presence. Now, it doesn't always translate to wins, but I do think that there is a level of competitiveness and an itch in them that they don't want to get punked by anybody. And so to me, that must be a really good thing for the kind of money that they paid for a mercurial player who we all felt like, is he really going to fit in Atlanta?
Yeah. It's interesting for me with Dwight because he's, like you said, he's always been the physical presence. I think Atlanta started off really, really well to begin the year with him and using him. And now that Millsap has gone through some injuries and Howard and I guess Schroeder have been having to be the offensive firepower. They've struggled a little bit in that time, and they were losing games even before Millsap went down with the injury. And I guess he'll be back soon. But his points per game were exactly about the same as they were last year. He's rebounding a little bit more. Getting 1+ rebounds a game. The blocks are exactly the same. So it's ironic that the perception is that he's having a better year when the statistics say it's pretty much the exact same thing. I think it's just a matter of Atlanta appreciates, and so at the beginning of the year they were using him a little bit more than maybe Houston was, but statistically it doesn't indicate that there's any difference. I think Atlanta is fine with it, and there's been some conversations as of late as the Hawks have struggled. It's like, oh well, do they miss Horford? But in those first 10 games, when we had the Hawks, highly in our Power 5, it was like, well, Horford, it doesn't do the same things that Dwight Howard does, and now that the Hawks are better off, and now you're seeing to see that narrative turn back to the other way a little bit. So ebbs and flows of an NBA season. I think Atlanta is just fine with Dwight Howard, and I think he's matriculated through the season pretty well thus far.
And I think the one thing as well, too, that what you were trading up or giving up for that is I think that vocal leader in the locker room. And remember, look, you've got Paul Millsap, Dennis Schroeder, who probably speaks more German than English. Okay, Kent Bazemore, the Baze Gaze is gonna incite an upliftment when you're going through this type of rut. I mean, listen, man, it's gonna fall on the shoulders of a guy like Dwight Howard, and you listen to him in these post-game conference, interviews. He doesn't sound like a guy that's still going to be like that vocal guy. Al Horford, I knew he was going to be that kind of guy. And I think you can clearly see that he's that type of guy. He's the type of guy in that locker room that helps stop those kind of, stretches of losses that they've gone through. I think that they are still looking for that guy within that locker room. It may be Paul Millsap. It may be Kyle Korver. It may just be Budenholzer himself has to step up and say that to these guys. But either way, I think the presence of why we're talking about Dwight Howard is what he brings on the basketball court. But clearly the losses that the Atlanta Hawks have suffered so far this year in these stretches are mere so a byproduct of someone stepping up and getting these guys to get it out of their minds of taking the tough losses that they've taken and going out there and getting a win and then kind of hitting that reset button so that they go back to their winning ways like they did in the first third of the first quarter of this season. Excellent topic to discuss so far. New faces and new places. We want to hear from you. Who do you think has been a surprise welcome picked up from this offseason to help your basketball team? Be sure to hit us up at NBA Baseline. We definitely want to hear from you. Cali Warrenshaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, and this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cali Warrenshaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. Two topics that we're going to break down. First topic is our Who You Got redo. This is part deux, okay? Not part two, but part deux. So a while back, we had this conversation about Jimmy Butler and Kawhi Leonard and the dynamic that both of these basketball players bring to the table, where they've come from and where they are now. I mean, the translation has been immense. And clearly these guys are budding superstars in the NBA. They're not even past the mid-20s so far, right? When we're talking about guys like Jimmy Butler and Kawhi Leonard. But we had asked this question some time ago. They said, if you were starting a basketball team, which two guard would you select to help start that franchise? Which two guard would you pick over? I had my selection at the time, Shaw. You had your selections, and you weighed in. Everybody else had weighed in about who they thought would really be Jimmy Butler, is going to be Kawhi Leonard. Now let's go ahead and fast forward to what we're seeing both of these guys do for their respective basketball teams, still with the Chicago Bulls, still with the San Antonio Spurs. Shaw, who you got?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. You know, if you go back and listen to the show, and for listeners who've been with us for a minute, you may remember this topic. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. It was December of 2014. When we had this conversation, and both guys were going to be entering a contract year and didn't know if they're going to be worth the max money and all those things. I think they both answered those questions, but we both went not necessarily begrudgingly, but hesitantly, like, oh, I don't know, it's still tough, it's a little tight with Kawhi. And I think, you know, I have no problems with that, especially going into this season now. Hindsight is 2020, as they say. Looking at what Kawhi has been able to do, looking like a true MVP candidate, not to take anything away from Jimmy Butler again. But I thought we even though we weren't sure that Kawhi getting the minutes and getting the touches that that Pop wasn't allowing him at that time, we weren't sure if he was going to come into this player. He has turned into the MVP candidate that many thought, and maybe were skeptical that he could be. But he's answered the bell on all of those questions. And so for me, it's still Kawhi Leonard. He's still edging him out a little bit, but maybe the gap is a little larger than it was 2 seasons ago. What do you say?
You think the gap is larger or narrower?
For me, I think Kawhi has separated himself a little from Jimmy. I really do. I think just overall versatility defensively, because Butler may have a very great offensive package. And has again, I still think he's not nearly as smooth as Kawhi has, but I think Kawhi has taken a bigger leap, stretched it out defensively than he has maybe offensively. I think Kawhi is a much better defensive player now than Jimmy Butler is. I think Jimmy Butler is still very exceptional. I just don't think he's he's never going to, I don't know if Butler's ever going to get in the conversation where Kawhi is in terms of being a defensive player of the year type player. And I think that's what the difference is for me.
So let me see if I understand you correctly. When Jimmy Butler was playing under Tom Thibodeau, the gap was much narrower than him now playing under Fred Hoiberg.
I mean, yeah. And I don't know that I don't know if the coaching has a lot to do with it, as opposed to just what the teams have been, what their teams have been asking them to do to some degree, where Kawhi is still scoring. I mean, Butler's still scoring a lot more. I just don't think he's as focused on defense as he once was, and that's fine. And he's not a bad defender. It's almost like talking about Paul George from X amount of seasons ago. Paul George is still an exceptional defender, but is he going to win a Defensive Player of the Year conversation? And I think when it comes to that, with how far Kawhi has come offensively and where he is defensively and still growing in that area, for me, that's what I'm saying. I think the gap is a little bit larger than it was 2 years ago. But again, you know, you still can't go wrong with either player. So would you change your pick, though? Would you go with Butler?
I got to tell you, I almost feel like it's really close for me to, you know what, man? I feel like, you know, that Kermit meme that's out there right now? You know, me, Cal. Yeah. Stay within the trueness of the goodness. You stay with Kawhi. And then the dark Cal is, no, it's Jimmy B. Defy. It's Jimmy B. And you know what? I'm going to go with Jimmy B for this brief moment. And here's the reason why, Shaw. It's the reason why I asked you the question about, you know, has the gap for you narrowed more when he was Jimmy Butler under Tom Thibodeau than he is Jimmy Butler that's under Fred Hoiberg. You know, it's interesting. We often talk about how basketball players, you know, if they're playing under the right system, what part of their game is going to translate to what you now see as a component or a proponent of that that basketball team being successful. And if you look at what has happened to the Chicago Bulls team over the last few years, the one thing that we can honestly say is that constant that is always been there for them has been the play of Jimmy Butler. Okay. A lot of it has been affected by what's happened off the court with Tom Thibodeau being the head coach. And even now with all of the moving parts, guys being brought in. And every single year, Jimmy Butler has improved his play. He supplanted himself and identified himself in saying, I am going to shoulder the burden to be the man for this basketball team. And I feel like part of that has been to the detriment of Kawhi Leonard in his tenure being with the San Antonio Spurs. Now, whether we just think it's the arrogance of Greg Popovich, or maybe it is the intellectual of Greg Popovich understanding who Kawhi Leonard is and what he actually should bring to the San Antonio Spurs team. But Shaw, I think from 2 years ago, we've been saying we want to see Kawhi Leonard bust out. This is no longer about, to me, the defenses. I think that Jimmy Butler now understanding his role as a basketball player and trying to be a superstar, he may have to compromise giving up some of the defensive components that really laid to him getting the minutes that he got for us to put him on the map. Now he's averaging 26 points per game. He's playing next to Dwayne Wade. He's playing next to Rajon Rondo. And yet he still finds ways to contribute for this basketball team in ways that, even though the records don't speak for how the Chicago Bulls are reflective of in comparison to Kawhi Leonard, I do think that the gap has narrowed to where we can recognize Jimmy Butler probably being more so a superstar well before we're going to see Kawhi Leonard getting it. Even though Kawhi Leonard is a 2-time defensive player of the year, I still feel like there's that missing piece of him kind of supplanting himself in the throes of this conversation. Maybe he could be that much closer to running towards that MVP thing, but I just feel like Greg Popovich, again, is going to get in his way from us being able to see that and appreciate that. So it may have me leaning more towards what I'm seeing from Jimmy Butler.
I mean, I think you can't go wrong. And I think it's an interesting case because statistically, Butler right now, as we record, has the edge, I think, in points, 25.6 to 24 for Kawhi. And, the rebounds and assists are pretty similar. The steals go to Kawhi. Oh, that, I mean, they're right there with each other when it comes down to it. And in a defensive, when it comes, again, my whole argument is based on the defensive side of things too. And for me, Jimmy Butler and Kawhi, they're close. When it comes down to that, right now for the respective ball clubs. So the argument can definitely be made one way or the other. I just feel like Kawhi is still a little bit more versatile and a little bit more engaged on the defense side of the basketball. And maybe that is because of who he plays for. Maybe it goes back to the earlier part, what you're talking about. Okay, is the coaching really the effect of what we have going on here? So it'll be interesting to see if Butler and Kawhi continue this path. And if Butler, I think, because he's in Chicago on a team that's not as good as Kawhi is, maybe that's why Jimmy's getting a little bit overlooked to some degree when it comes to the MVP conversation and all of that as well too. And again, not saying that either one of them are going to win it, but I think Kawhi's name is being mentioned more often, and a guy who was underrated a couple of seasons ago now is getting the praise that that comes along with being a superstar in this league. And maybe Butler's a little bit behind that, and maybe that's a little bit on us as media types, if you will, because Chicago isn't as good a team as San Antonio is.
I just don't think people are still buying into Jimmy Butler being the face of that. Look, Jimmy Butler, when the Chicago Bulls moved Derrick Rose to the New York Knicks, nobody was talking about, okay, the Chicago Bulls are going to go out and try and get themselves Dwayne Wade, right? A 3-time NBA champion, right? Dwayne Wade. Like, no one's talking about that. That wasn't what was being discussed. Once Derrick Rose got moved, once Tom Thibodeau finally left, everyone is saying, yeah, this looks like this is going to be Jimmy Butler's team. Like, this is finally going to be his team. Then in the offseason, they go and they get Rajon Rondo. They get Rajon Rondo, like, this is still Jimmy Butler's team. Rajon Rondo cannot score points like Jimmy Butler scores points. Then they get Dwayne Wade. And then now all of a sudden so whose team is this going to be? Is it, because it's not like Dwayne Wade so absolutely sucks that he can't be the leader and the face of the Chicago Bulls for the next 3 seasons. And Chicago Bulls fans so badly want their Jordan face on somebody. And they wanted to equate them winning going deep into the playoffs. And I don't know if they've necessarily bought into the idea that's supposed to be Jimmy Butler. I feel like it's a de facto feeling of Jimmy Butler being that face, so to speak, which is why I think it's to the discredit when we're making that comparison to a guy like Kawhi Leonard, because Kawhi Leonard has always been the next in line, right? He's always been the heir to the throne. It's just a matter of whenever Greg Popovich finally lets go of Tony Parker and finally lets Manu Ginobili retire with Lionel Messi back in Argentina, right? Tim Duncan's already gone. And LaMarcus Aldridge is LaMarcus Aldridge. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he ain't going to be the greatest of anything for the San Antonio Spurs. It's going to be Kawhi Leonard. He is the NBA MVP, helped him win that championship within these last 5 years or 6 years so far, going back before 2010. He's going to be that face. It's just a matter of, are we buying into Jimmy Butler being that face? And I feel like that's where that kind of severs the idea and the depiction of who can get at it better, who can get at it faster, and who would you want on your team that's going to best represent that brand, that quality, so to speak, that what we're talking about as being the full package. That to me is why it's so close. And I feel like with Jimmy Butler, in ways, if we strip all of that craziness, he could be very much right there, bro.
Yeah, I mean, and it's fine. I still feel like, though, to some degree, Butler has to maybe, in a sense, in some essence, do more because Chicago is worse than the Spurs are. So even from a minute standpoint, Butler does get more minutes than Kawhi, and they're roughly, in the same range in terms of their numbers in general. And again, you really can't go wrong when it comes down to either one of these players. But it'd be interesting to see what our fans and listeners think of this. When we had this conversation a couple years ago, I want to believe, even though we voted Kawhi on the show, if I remember the Twitter polls and things like that too, a lot of people were leaning towards Butler. And I think that's because he was in the midst of one of his better statistical seasons at the time as well too, and really trying to carry that Chicago Bulls team in the midst of Derrick Rose being out. It would be interesting to see where they're at right now. Again, I think public perception is like, oh, Kawhi is so great and he's so good, and Jimmy Butler, he's good too, but he's right there with Kawhi. So it'd be interesting to see what people have to say when the show comes out. Definitely,
and we want to definitely hear from you. It's another one of those NBA baseline NBA podcast Twitter poll thoughts, man. Like, we're revisiting the question again. Would you take Jimmy Butler, Chicago Bulls, or would you take Kawhi Leonard? And do you feel that the gap has narrowed, or has it gotten much further apart, as my eloquent co-host brother has mentioned in the outset of what he's been talking about? I think it's narrowed even further, and I have leaned to the defy side of this conversation. But my man, he steadfast and holds true to the force. So he's gonna stick with Kawhi, and I'm leaning. I've leaned a little bit more to Jimmy Butler. No disrespect to the Claw. You know what I'm saying? He still has a grip on things, holding it down very lovely as far as being amongst the best in the NBA. But I got to start showing a little bit of love to my man Jimmy B. All right, Shaw. Let's go ahead and get into the second topic of our segment of the drop, and it's our spotlight that we want to shed on a dude who. Listen, man, I liked this guy when he was playing for the New York Knicks, and I felt like the Carmelo Anthony trade pretty much killed all aspirations and desire and really a lot of my sleep time, because he wound up playing in Denver. And I don't know about you, bro, but I can't wait up all night long watching the Denver Nuggets play basketball all the time. You know what I mean? So our man Wilson Chandler, I feel like I was deprived of some quality basketball watching in Wilson Chandler, that and the fact that he played under some really bad coaching and they didn't know what to do with this dude. But he, after so much injury over the last couple of seasons, man, this guy is coming out like gangbusters. And I know you wanted to spotlight his gameplay because he is absolutely flying under the radar under a struggling Nuggets team. But if not for the play of Wilson Chandler, this Nuggets team really wouldn't even have that kind of recognition of struggle.
Yeah, you're right. And let me be, very honest here. Wilson Chandler, I've never been a big Wilson Chandler guy. I thought he was kind of.
Oh no, you weren't. Yeah, definitely. No, y'all would get at me for this, talking about Wilson. He's trash. He's garbage. I don't even want to get into what our boy Nunzio used to say about
trash.
stuff.
It's just that he wasn't necessarily always an efficient player, and he was kind of always looking for his shot first. And again, I know he's not a passer. He's not supposed to be that, but I think he could have been a different type of ball mover and be more effective than just a guy who puts up a bunch of points and rebounds here and there. But all that said, coming off of injury, and even if you go back to when we did our division preview, where we're like, all right, well, who's going to start for this team, and should they start Jokic and Nurkic, or should it be Jokic and Gallinari? Then who fills that role? We're like, I guess Wilson Chandler. He kind of has to play, kind of de facto, play the de facto 3-man. He's been their best player, hands down. There's a lot of guys in Denver who could have made claim to that per se at the start of the season, with Gallinari being in chief among that.
He's better than Gallinari right now,
right?
Way better.
With all the hubbub about Jokic and how he played in the Olympics and all that, everyone was expecting those two guys, and maybe even Moutier to take a step up in year 2. But Wilson Chandler has been the Denver Nuggets everything. He saved their bacon in a couple of games that they have won this year, and has been their most impactful player throughout this entire season, leading them in scoring, among their leaders in rebounding as well too. I'm just immensely surprised and happy for this guy. When he got his contract a couple years ago or 2 seasons ago, and they re-signed him, we're like, well, why? This is a guy who's 13, 14 a game, nothing really great about him. But now we really see that he's come back from his injury, and I think that's the other part of it too that has me really excited for him. He's come back from injury, he took the entire year off, and is playing immense, great basketball for this franchise. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, because I feel like Denver could probably trade him and get something of real value for him right now. But he's been everything that they've needed him to be and more thus far in the NBA.
I don't know what has happened during the course of his rehab. But I clearly see that he is much more grounded in his basketball game. Back in his early years, when he was playing for the New York Knicks, he had so much athleticism that maybe even he didn't know where he would fit in when he was playing for the Knicks and playing under Mike D'Antoni and, kind of going through the throes of the things that he went through. But ever since this injury, and a lot of his injury has been, below the waist, basically, for him. When it comes to Wilson Chandler, he is much stronger than what his position when he came into the league and what he represents. He's one of those physical, versatile players still, and he has a little bit of athleticism in him, not quite the same, because I think that he is bulked up a little bit more on weight. But when I watch him play this year, man, he is definitely playing like a guy that could play like a point forward. He doesn't have the length like a Giannis Antetokounmpo, but he's the kind of guy that plays a little bit like Blake Griffin. That's what it kind of reminds me of. And he shoots the basketball extremely well. He's shooting it much better. He's at a career high right now as far as points scored at 18.6. He's only used to averaging somewhere around 14 points per game. And he's not even 30 years old yet, bro. You know what I'm saying? Like, so to me, he still has some good years left ahead of him, where if he is not going to be able to do anything as part of the rebuilding process for this Nuggets team, some basketball team is going to be able to utilize his services, because I really think that he can definitely contribute. He has definitely added a dimension to his game, to my point again, that's much more grounded in the way that he can help score the basketball. I think in many ways, he kind of represents what I think a lot of people was hoping to have gotten from the Manimal. And now we're seeing that come to fruition with Wilson Chandler. And he's actually been their best perimeter player, more so than Danilo Gallinari, who you can clearly see is not adjudicated well from this offseason, given what he was contributing the second half of last year. So to me, he's their best basketball player. He's definitely upped his ante, so to speak, when the cap goes up and teams are going to be willing to acquiesce for his services. My whole thing is can he continue to keep this going? Can he stay healthy and produce in this kind of manner? He could very well be their Will Barton last year, that he could give this Nuggets team this year, but really, really put more on his stake of what he can contribute moving forward.
Yeah, if they keep him in his current role, one of my contributors in ShotSports.net, Ashley Douglas, showed a story about Chandler potentially being the 6th man of the year and walking away with that award. So if they keep him in that role, and he may be too good where they may need to bring him to the starting lineup, but if not, yeah, I think he has the inside track on that award, and maybe some other things too, and maybe getting out of Denver. But that might be a little bit short-sighted on their part, because it's like you said, he's leading the team in scoring, second in rebounding, shooting his highest field goal percentage from the floor, and shooting his highest effective field goal percentage as well in his entire career. This guy's just played great thus far in the first 18 to 20 games of the year, and I just hope he can keep it up. And kudos to Wilson Chandler, man. I tip my hat.
Definitely, man. So you know what? we could stop dogging him for like the 50 gazillion tats. I don't know who is in more competition, Wilson Chandler or J.R. Smith, with the body being all tatted up. But his game is tatted up right now. My man is scoring buckets, and he is the only shining light for a struggling Denver Nuggets basketball team. And we're just happy that he is fully healthy and playing up to his potential. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast to coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. The new CBA could have the NBA season start in mid-October. More basketball earlier? Are you serious?
I'm doing a cartwheel right now, bro. But I think this is really something that the players and even the league has wanted. They're going to shorten the preseason potentially. Instead of 8 games, they'll make that 5 or 6 games, and then more or less that will help them limit back-to-backs throughout the rest of their season. Not so many 4 games and 5 nights, all of that stuff. So if they start the season a couple weeks earlier, that's going to help stretch things out so that these guys can get some appropriate rest during the season itself.
All right. Out in Dallas, man, unfortunate news for a basketball team that we had a conversation that struggled so much this year. But certainly this is not going to help them. Dirk Nowitzki is out indefinitely due to the sustained injury. How bad a blow is this? Or is this actually a brightening spot for Rick Carlisle to start playing some people?
Well, I think it's a little of both, because your man Dwight Powell, he got some plus minutes recently. I think he had a nice performance of 17 and 8 and got roughly 28 minutes, I think, in that. So Powell needs to be in that range, if you will. And this is one of those situations where the Mavericks can be unintentionally tanking. So if Dirk is signed he's signed through next season as well too. Maybe they get another guy can really help this team out in the near future. But Nowitzki, he wants to play. He's not dogging it. If he can get it back out there without Achilles injury, he'll be out there. So we're wishing Dirk a speedy recovery, and hopefully the Mavs can get their season around.
Well, one person I think is happy about this is Mark Cuban, because he finally is seeing Harrison Barnes living up to the potential of the money he shelled out for him. So maybe this might not necessarily be a good thing and might ease people's transition away from the Nowitzki era to then finally saying this could be the era of Harrison Barnes as a Dallas Maverick, right? Out in Brooklyn, Donatas Motiejunas. It's been so long since we've mentioned that name, bro. Such a good player, too, when he was playing out of Houston, man. I don't know what happened, but finally the Brooklyn Nets, while they're shopping around, pulling every single player that they could possibly think of to come play in Brooklyn, they've signed an offer sheet to bring over Donatas Motiejunas. What do we think about the acquisition of Mr. Motiejunas?
Well, as we record the show, the Rockets can still match, but obviously I don't think that's going to happen because they could have signed him a while ago if they wanted to keep him. He fits what Brooklyn is doing. They shoot a lot of threes. He can shoot the 3-ball. He's a big man who can help stretch the floor, and he can rebound and all of those things too. If I'm Trevor Booker, though, I'm a little like, what the hell? Because Trevor Booker played pretty good basketball this year, and, Motiejunas would be coming there and be direct competition for him, but I guess he could also spell Brook Lopez as well too. So it's a decent signing for Brooklyn, especially with how they want to play and just getting decent talent, nothing that's going to break the bank from their salary camps.
It just makes you think Sean Marks thinking possibly trying to make some moves. Listen, man, nothing's ever guaranteed, especially in Brooklyn. But listen, stay true to who you are, Brooklyn. Brooklyn keeps on taking it. All right, the rest keep on faking it. Out in Philadelphia, Ben Simmons could be the 76ers point guard when he returns. I don't know if that should be actually an exciting thing for 76ers fans, or if TJ McCollum should be insulted by this.
Well, I think the entire Philly point guard situation, that whole roster should be like, well, all right, we're just not good enough. Because then no matter what, you always hear them in trade rumors. Bayless has been hurt now. Rodriguez has played remarkably well, I think, and that's why he's ahead of McConnell right now on the depth chart. But they just really love Simmons' overall skill set and what he's able to do.
Depth chart, that should be the death chart. If you're a point guard and you find up in Philly, nothing is guaranteed. Look, Ish Smith was there and he was their best point guard probably in the last 3 years, and he wound up going to play for somebody else.
And MCW, all these guys, they've had a lot of players come through there at that point guard position. But according to Brett Brown, what he's seen of Simmons in the rehab is he really is growing more encouraged that Simmons can be their point guard. So I don't know if it means kind of like he's going to start there, or he's just going to handle the ball kind of like how Giannis does, kind of like how LeBron does. But either way, it'll be interesting to see when Simmons comes back next month in January.
Well, the 76ers have to first trust in the process. Now they can trust in the progress. Out in, the NBA, they have gone ahead and recognized Tyronn Lue and Steve Kerr as coaches of the month. Are we surprised by both of these guys and their nominations?
Absolutely not. I mean, two best teams in their respective conferences. Cleveland has slipped a little bit as we record, but that's fine. Golden State, I think they won 11 of the last 12 as we record as well too. So just to see those two teams being exactly who we thought they were going to be in the early part of this regular season, no surprise that those two coaches have been nominated for that award or given that award.
Definitely. And finally, Shaw, LeBron James, Russell Westbrook, Bron, and the Brody named players of the month. Really, can we argue? Did Russell Westbrook have 15 triple doubles in this month or something like that? I can't recall, but
it's insane. What Russ is doing would be hard to replicate in a video game, to be honest, right now, with all these triple doubles and as gaudy as they have been. So I like what you said, man. Bron and Brody, definitely the two best players of the NBA in the first month of the season, their respective conferences. I think Harden's obviously probably had a better season than LeBron has statistically, and that's just by the sheer gaudiness of his numbers as well too. So either way, I think you could have gone with any of those guys, but I think Russ and LeBron are definitely of deserving in their respective conferences. So I'm happy with that decision and can't wait to see who gets it next month.
Definitely, man. And hey, man, Bron and Brody, but look out for it. Nickelodeon might start.
You know what I'm saying? An underdog. Put that on a t-shirt.
Underdog. We need to get us an intern. You know what I'm saying? Probably not call him underdog. Probably call him overall. You know what I'm saying? Or something like that. So overall.
Let's say coverall.
Put it coverall. Put it on a mem. You know what I'm saying?
That's what's up.
Bron and Brody, ride or die. You know what I'm saying? Kind of like Bad Boys Part 3. All right, y'all. So excellent show as always, man. So much great topic and content that we've thrown out there, and we hope that our listeners of the Baseline NBA podcast, our new and old listeners, were able to partake and kind of absorb some of the thoughts that we had with reference to everything that we've discussed. Man, really great show this week.
Absolutely, man. Again, I love, talking the NBA, especially with you, my dude, and hopefully everybody enjoys, loves and what we talk about on a regular basis. And again, we just want to hear from you guys. Make sure you're tuning in. Make sure you're hitting us on Twitter, even our Facebook, our Instagram, anything that you can get us out on. We're going to reply, and make sure, said it 4 times. Make sure again that you tune in and make sure you're giving us a rating on each and every single show. We need it out there to get up in these rankings, man, because again, I just feel like we have an amazing product, and I hope that you guys think the same as well.
Definitely, man. So for the Baseline, Cali, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys, each and every single one of you. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.